everyone. Welcome to the Will to Live Initiative podcast. A new podcast where I investigate ongoing, unlawful, non-consensual experimentation on innocent men and women in the U.S. and possibly abroad. I am one of those people victimized by this atrocity, and now I am working hard to restore justice by sharing evidence and information in hopes of prompting a proper investigation. Join me in my fight and help raise awareness by tuning in and sharing this podcast with your family and friends. How do you even begin to tell a story like this? Where do you start? Sure, you start at the beginning, but because this is so new and different and unbelievable, you, the listener, have to be prepared for what you're about to learn. You have to understand certain fundamentals, certain basic principles, in order to understand what is and is not possible, so you can distinguish fact from fantasy. And also to help you overcome doubt and disbelief, which is a major roadblock to getting the help we need to overcome this whole thing. It can be difficult for victims to explain what's happening to them because most of us know nothing about military warfare, military weapons and tactics, the principles of psychological manipulation, or even information about IT, information technology related issues, So we depend on what we find online because that's where we turn for answers, because we're so desperate to know what's happening with us, what's going on, and are there others that this is happening to. We depend on what we find online without really knowing how to filter out and separate the lies from the truth. And this is how we can wind up sounding crazy to everybody else, because we really haven't gotten a grasp on the proper language and the terminology needed to explain these types of things and express them. So when we try to explain it to other people, they just don't get it. Now, some people may say, well, you don't have any military experience, or, how do you understand those things? Well, luckily for me, I spent a number of years, studying, psychological topics dealing with the mind and with influence, dealing with perception, studying neuro-linguistic programming, reading a little bit about military warfare, but only in terms of looking at them as classic literature, like, The Art of War by Sun Tzu and things like that, and also information technology, IT. That's, that was a career for me for a good number of years. So I do have, a good understanding of certain principles when it comes to IT, and how things work, in addition to a lot of other things. So I was lucky in that regard because I knew certain basic things that would help me to gather the proper information. Now, there was still a lot I did not know, especially in relation to this. And even with the things that I already knew, I was studying them, for either business purposes or for my own personal knowledge, never to use them as tools of, counterintelligence or to try to battle an enemy. When you don't really look at it in that perspective or studying for that purpose, then you don't really know how to use them in that manner. So I've had to kind of pivot and start to, learn everything for a different purpose. And this has been going on for, 4 years, possibly longer. So I've had to spend a lot of time researching, investigating, studying. So the things that I talk about are either from my own experience or through my own investigation, in order to try to make sense of it for myself, and also so that I can try to make it make sense to you, the listener, so that you won't be lost when I'm trying to explain it, and so also so that we can get the proper help that we need in order to get this thing investigated properly. One thing I've learned is that no matter what facts or evidence you present, whether what you say is the truth or not, if someone doesn't care or is convinced that you're wrong, it doesn't matter what you say. Some people will only believe certain sources. They're determined to not believe you. Someone else could say the same exact thing that you say, and the person will be convinced. And there's not much you can do about that. And you may think that people don't understand, like in this case, and they don't. But they could if they wanted to. They don't want to. And they don't want to because they're afraid. Afraid that somehow they'll be brought down. If they think you're crazy, then they feel like listening to you is going to make them crazy, like it's infectious, like what you say is going to harm them in some way. But that's just not true. When you have a mind that's able to think things through, because that's what intelligence is. You're able to take information and apply it properly, right? But you have to first be able to take in information. You have to be able to listen, to hear, in order to understand. And that's one of the roadblocks that I run into and other victims run into. No one, with the exception of 2 close friends, believes what I'm telling them about this experiment. Most people, family included, think I've gone crazy. And that can be difficult because of how perception works. When you talk to other people, when you talk to strangers, and they see that the people in your inner circle don't believe you, then they're liable to think, well, if they don't believe you, then why should we believe you? Right? Now, of course, the intelligent mind doesn't think that way. The intelligent mind doesn't really go off of what other people do or do not believe. They look at what is. They look at the evidence. They look at the facts. And then they go from there. But, perception, common perception, common knowledge. It acts that way. Family tends to ignore the problem. Even though I've tried to explain it to them several times, they don't get it. And they don't get it because they don't take the time to understand it. They disregard it and try to disassociate or distance themselves. And on a basic level, it's really to avoid any type of embarrassment or involvement. But you have to think, how do you know? What do you see that causes you to doubt? What have you heard? What have you seen? Again, their failure to understand does not make them right. If they haven't reviewed the evidence or taken the time to see it, hear it, and understand it, then they have no understanding. If they avoid the topic, then they have no understanding. And they can see that something is wrong, and that's what they say. When I ask them, well, do you believe it? They say, well, we know that something's not right. Instead of saying, no, we believe you, or no, we don't believe you, they say, well, we see that something's not right. And they can at least see that. They see that I'm not myself. They see that I am being negatively affected by something. Something they don't understand, something that they can't see. They see that, I don't go outside at all really anymore. They see that my hygiene is affected. I don't dress the same. I used to take great pride in my appearance, and that's just kind of going out the window. I'm hyper vigilant, always recording, always using these different meters and electromagnetic measuring devices, making a petition, scheduling conference calls, hair unkept, clothes unkept, was sleeping in my truck and out of work, no money, no car, always asking, for help and trying to explain these things, and yet nothing, and not even to the point where they feel like, okay, well, we got to get you some, mental help. And that's kind of common, especially within the Black community. We tend to ignore things, and not that you're dealing with a mental health issue here, but when there are mental health issues, we tend to kind of just let the person be. It's like, okay, well, we'll keep you alive, we'll keep your body breathing, but just kind of stay out of the way. And that's what happens here. There's really little to no effort to understand. They don't ask questions or even say, hey, what can I do to help? And the same with friends, people that I never would have guessed in a million years that they would have left me hanging, because I wouldn't do that to them. I would at least on a very basic level try to understand. And I get it. It's something new. It's unheard of, and it sounds completely preposterous. But yet still it's the truth. When you make the effort to sit down and listen and understand what's happening, and you combine that with the knowledge that the United States government and other countries, have a history of secret experimentation, have a history of torture, not just to the minority population, not just to Black people, but to a lot of different people, but especially to us. There's that history there. So when you combine knowledge of that, and then you look at the evidence and you see what is and is not real, then you come into an understanding. like I said, not just them, but no one really believes. And that's because there's really a lack of awareness, amongst the public. When you see shows like Dr. Phil, he's had a couple of people who've had similar experiences on his show, as well as if you look online, you'll see certain psychologists talking about it. And they talk about it in a way that they're basically saying it's not true. You're dealing with what they call psychogenic illness, or mass psychogenic illness. And that is basically where you have a phenomena that happens, and it triggers something in the people that are in a particular group or area. For instance, there was a school, I can't remember where this school was. It was in some other country where, there was a girl who started just having these laughing fits. And she would just laugh and laugh and laugh. It was uncontrollable. And then other girls, in the class, and then in the school, it just spread. And there was no real discernible reason for it. It just happened. So it's something that starts in the mind. It has very real physical effects. And because they don't know the cause or understand the cause, they just call it mass psychogenic illness and leave it at that. When they can't come up with an answer and they are too lazy to investigate, that's what they call it. And that's the same in this case. However, the difference between this and that is you can actually measure the effects and determine the cause of what's happening. Now, government officials have not said a word about civilian casualties. Okay? They haven't said that civilians are affected. They haven't said civilians aren't affected. But for psychologists and journalists and other quote-unquote so-called professionals to come out and say, it's not something that's real, it's not something that's really happening. Well, if a proper, thorough investigation hasn't been conducted, then how can you say that it's not true? How can you say it's not real? Why say that? There can only be two possible explanations as to why they would say such a thing. Either A, they're really ignorant and have no understanding of what's going on because they haven't done an investigation. Or they do know that it's real and it's part of an effort to conceal and avoid detection and identification. Remember, that's one of the basic principles, okay? Avoid detection and identification, right? And you have to use all sorts of different tactics and means to try to accomplish that, right? So, if there is no thorough investigation, a proper investigation, you're really not going to understand. Even if they've spoken with victims, have they searched for evidence? It's not just talking to victims. When you're investigating a crime, what do? You don't just depend on witness testimony alone. You look for actual evidence, something that can be measured, seen, something tangible that you can point to and say, hey, this connects this person to the crime, beyond a reasonable doubt. So for these people, have they, checked the frequencies, at a particular location, at the scene, run spectrum analysis, interviewed possible witnesses and neighbors, run tests on victims' bodies, have they really been thorough in that? And that's one of the things that I intend to do with this podcast, is present the evidence that I've gathered which is very thorough, and which proves beyond a shadow of a doubt what's happening, so that there can really be no doubt. And after you've seen this, if you still don't believe, then quite frankly, you're an idiot, and you just don't want to know the truth. And I can't do anything about that. There are two basic principles that you'll need to know in order to understand the evidence I'll be presenting to you. The first is that every act is intentional and malicious, designed to keep the target in a perpetual state of physical and mental stress. It's designed to keep the target angry, fearful, anxious, hypervigilant, and a whole host of other negative emotions and thoughts, along with constant physical pain of the singeing and searing heat and blunt force trauma that these weapons give to the body and mind of the target. The second thing is that everything is centered around the agent and informant avoiding being detected and identified. Everything is done to affect the target while avoiding getting caught. Everything is done in patterns that are tailored specifically to the target and that only the target will recognize. This is how gaslighting works. Okay? When a perpetrator or a bad actor will commit certain acts or take certain action that is so subtle, so obscure that the average person would not be paying attention to it, or really wouldn't understand what is happening, or wouldn't see what was a big deal. But to the target, it's something completely different. It does mean something, and it does have a negative effect. And for the people who don't understand that, then that's how you wind up, looking quote unquote crazy. And that's not something that's just specific to what I and other victims of electromagnetic attacks are experiencing, but it's something that a lot of other victims experience, especially in domestic violence situations, or in what's called workplace mobbing and a lot of other different things. But keep those two basic principles in mind, and then you will have an understanding of the evidence that's presented, and you'll be able to look at it through that lens or those lenses, and that will help you to understand it better. Okay? So principle 1, keep the target in a perpetual state of physical and mental stress. 2, avoid detection and identification. Okay? Remember those two things, and you'll understand how it works. And this concludes episode 2. I hope that you'll join me for the next episode, where I'll start to get into more detail about what's happening and start with some basics to really start to help you drive this home. And I hope that you'll stick with me and take the time to really listen, to think, and to learn, because as I've said before, this is a complex puzzle, and all of the pieces must be examined in order to see the whole picture and see the truth of what's happening. I hope you'll join me and follow along as I work to end this torture for myself and others who may be suffering. Please take a moment to sign the petition at change.org/will-to-live. You can also follow me on Twitter at will-to-live-us. That's WILLTOLIVEUS. And that's also the same name for my Instagram, also will-to-live-us. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications for alerts when I publish new episodes. I thank you for your time, and I appreciate you listening and following along. Please share this with your friends. Have conversations and discussions. Let's raise awareness on this so we can put an end to it. In the meantime, keep praying and standing up for human rights. I'm Will, and I'm out.